Hello, I'm Daniela. In today's video, I have a fun project that's really simple to do. Just pull out your favorite Halloween fabrics. And if you don't have Halloween fabrics, use colors that inspire you. You can also gear this activity towards any holiday. But I was thinking for Halloween, this is a fun way to use up some of those fabrics. They tend to all coordinate somewhat because the colors tend to really be heavy on blacks and whites and oranges. So let's get started creating this panel. So this project is based on the Halloween theme, but if you don't have Halloween themed fabric, which is very plentiful and actually kind of addictive to find, just use some colors that inspire you for Halloween. So here I have some dark black and purple, a beautiful array of oranges. And if you have some plaids, particularly in the fall colors, those will work just as well. There's really quite a beautiful assortment that you can use. And you can even make it so it's not Halloween themed by just using whatever colors you choose, or even patterns. So the first thing that I did was decide what size I wanted my page to be that I'm going to work on. And since I'm using this page from a fabric book where I have one side already completed, this will be my page. Now the way I'm binding this book is a little different than in other cases. So I need to leave about a 1.5 inch border, which is where I'm going to bind it. So I cut my background fabric, and that's what I'm going to stitch on, because ultimately I will stitch the completed page to my fabric book page. So I chose fabric that I really liked. It's kind of neutral, the black and white checkers. It could be fall, could be even Christmas, but I'm going to use it for the background for this Halloween striped page. So I'm going to take that fabric, and that's what I'm going to use it for. Now I already tore strips of fabric and I cut some others. I wanted a nice high contrast. So with all of those fabrics, I just really settled down on orange plaid and just an orange piece of different tie-dyed look of fabric, batik maybe. And then I had these black and white patterns. I'm not sure if I'm going to use them all or if I'm going to cut them down further, but that's exactly how I'm going to design them. Now I like the rough edge. I might even pull out some strands here to make the edges a little more rough. But if you don't like the rough edge, I'll just show you what to do really quickly. So to make your stripes, cut your fabric twice the size of what you want your strip to be. You could even go further than that. And then you're just going to take it and fold it. And you'll fold one side a little more than half. If you're somebody who really thrives on precision, then take your time and measure it. And then I just fold it over so that it just overlaps just slightly. And then I just press that down so that I have my fabric stripe that doesn't have any rough edges or even any edges showing. So if you're somebody who likes that look, and it is a beautiful look, then do that with all your fabric pieces. I'm going to use just the raw edge because that's the look that I'm going for today. But this is how you achieve that beautiful, neat edge on your stripes. So now to do the design work, what I'm going to do is take my stripes and decide exactly how far apart I want them spaced and how thick they are. I just made a generic, maybe 1.25 inch stripe, but that's just for placement and to start it out with. All of this design work is completely adjustable. I might find that I don't need all my strips of fabric at all because I do want some of this background to show through. Because of the way I'm going to stitch it down, it will peek through anyway, but I know I might want to leave a little more in some areas. So for example, this fabric, just by nature of the fabric, I'm going to just cut it in half. And I'll have a thinner strip. I actually have 2 strips here that I can use. And the same thing here. Now with my darks, my fabrics here, my black and whites, I want to go from lightest to darkest, or darkest to lightest, depending on which direction I'm putting them. So obviously this one has more white in it, so this will be my lightest one. I think I'm going to work on that on the inside and then work my way out. Now this strip is a little larger than I want, so I'm going to cut this down as well. I'll slowly pull it apart, and it just gives that hint of the images on that fabric. And lastly, I want this nice dark fabric, and I already love the way it's fraying on the edge here. So more or less, this is how I want my fabric to be. I'm going to pin it in place. I can maybe adjust it a little bit. And right now I'll just pin all the strips in place. And then I want to select the colors that I want for the thread, because my stitches are really going to show. Or I could choose colors where they're not going to show so brightly. So really that's the next stage of the design process, is choosing the colors for your stitches. So I'll pin these down, choose the colors, and then we'll come back and start our stitching. So I've selected my colors. I have a beautiful charcoal here. It's not quite black, it's just a little lighter than black. This yellowy orange and an orange, just very Halloween-y colors. So I'm just going to come around the edge here and just trim the edge pieces just so that it's a little neater to work with. These aren't going to be the final trims. This is just something to make my piece look neater for me and just less of a hassle, less fabric flopping around. So eventually I'll trim them down, but I'm not sure if I want to have some of that black and white fabric peeking through or not. So now for the design process, I like to be somewhat spontaneous. I give it a little bit of thought in the beginning. And so I'm going to try and stitch down all of the orangey colors here with 2 strips of just either a back stitch or a running stitch on either side of the colored strips, and just a running stitch down the center of these black and white strips. So I have my charcoal thread. I'll start at the end here. I'll just flip this over so I don't get poked. And I'll just make a running stitch down all the black and white strips of fabric. And I want this stitch to show, but basically more for texture than appearance. So it'll serve 2 purposes. It'll add a little texture to my work, but it will also tack that strip down and help me eliminate these pins here. Now you could trace a line if you wanted to make it perfectly straight. I like the look of the imperfect, particularly for this Halloween piece. I think that's kind of interesting anyway, but I also in general like the look of a hand-stitched piece, so it doesn't look factory made. So I'll just continue to stitch all the way down, and I'll stitch all 3 of these black and white pieces, and then I'll make 2 strips of just a running stitch down with these orange pieces, and I'll show you how it looks. So now I've stitched everything down on the black and white. I just did a running stitch down the center, more or less, and then I stitched 2 lines down on our colored fabric here. What I want to do now is just flip this over. I also wanted to show you the back where you can see all my stitches and the knots from the threads. And I just want to trim right up against the page of fabric that I have here. So I think that's going to be my finished size for these strips, but I can always trim them down further. Now from here you can have your page just like this as is. And it's pretty effective. But I want to take some of these colored threads, these oranges, and play with them. So I'm going to use that on my rows here with my double stitching. I'll start with my darkest color because the lightest color will really make it pop, and I want to use that fairly sparingly. So I'm going to come in here, and I think I'm going to stitch maybe down on the outer pieces because I want some balance to this piece. I'm going to stitch a very tight line right down the center, so a back stitch. I'll start even a little in from where my other stitches were just to make it really stand out. I'll create my first stitch. It's not terribly small, and then I'll create my back stitch. Now the back stitch is nice because it makes a continuous line. It doesn't look like a continuous line. It looks like lots of stitches, but each stitch touches very close to the end of the other stitch. So it makes a nice continuous looking line. So I'll stitch the entire center down here for both and show you how that looks. And then I'll work on something a little fun for the centerpiece. So now I have my back stitches on either side here on these orange colored fabric stripes. So now for the center one, I want to do something that will make it pop. This is the point where you can really personalize this and add as much stitching or as little as you want. The more stitches, the really more intriguing it looks, and the more colors and so on. But it really is about personal preference. What I want to do now is take that orange that I used here, and instead of doing a back stitch, I want to do another running stitch, but I want to make sure that I space it adequately, because in between those spaces I'm going to use that lighter color. So again, I'm going to start a little ways up from where the gray stitches went, and I'll make just a bunch of running stitches. So I like to start with the first one because that really anchors it down. I'll turn my piece to the side here, and I'll try and keep all my bright orange stitches approximately the same length, just because that's what I want. If it doesn't work out that way, I can either take out stitches or just play around with it and make it work after it's done. But I like to just skip a little bit and then have a fairly longer stitch than the skip. And I'll gently pull it out. I'll keep stitching just to get to the end, but again, not all the way to the end. And then I'll make a final stitch and knot off my orange thread. So I'll come around back, make a teeny little stitch above it, and clip that. So then I can take a look over here. And now I want to take that lighter thread and stitch in between those stitches. So I'll come up here, cast a stitch, and then just follow that path in between those orange stitches. Now it's a subtle effect, but it really is nice to add that pop of color, that little light color in between my orange stitches. So there we have our fabric swatch using different colors of fabric and different prints for the Halloween theme. What I'll do to actually use it in my work is just attach it to my book page here. Now I can leave it as it is. I can always add more stitches if I want, but you can always find just little interesting things to add to your work. One thing I noticed when I was going to one of the stores are these little felt skeletons. They're already pre-cut. They're just a really inexpensive felt. I believe it was a garland. There was maybe half a dozen of these on just some ribbon. I just thought that was interesting because I could use fabric to work with. So I can decide if I want to just cut this down and put this on my page, or maybe both of them. I think I'll leave this as it is, just because I really like all that texture showing through. But that shows you how you can use kind of found objects in your stitching that pertain to the holiday. So that's how I create my Halloween inspired panel. It's a fun way to use up fabric. It's a simple project, and you could take it as far as you want. You could make the edges nice and pristine, or you can have them torn and rustic, kind of like reminiscent of a haunted house. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Thanks for joining me today.